Dick Van Dyke revealed the six most evil actors of all time. Very few performers in Hollywood history are loved more than Dick Van Dyke. For over 70 years now, his super fun charm, big smile, and super wholesome nice guy image have made him someone that almost all Americans really trust and enjoy in movies and TV shows. This makes his secret private opinions about the really dark and ugly side of Hollywood feel even more shocking and surprising to hear. A former studio helper who worked close to him said that Van Dyke got to see these big famous stars exactly as they truly were in real life. Not the shiny perfect pictures and smiles they showed everyone in public, but the actual real people when the doors were closed and no cameras or fans were around. And some of the things he saw upset him deeply and made him feel really uncomfortable and sad. What makes these stories so interesting and hard to forget is how they show the huge gap between the sweet, lovable people that everyone adored on movie screens and TV, and the scary, mean way they really acted in their private lives. The handsome leading men who looked so brave, the funny comedians who made us all laugh out loud, and the warm dad-like figures that families invited into their living rooms every week often hid secret personalities that were full of real violence, cruelty to others, and using their big power in terrible, hurtful ways. A smart culture historian who studies old Hollywood said, "Hollywood is really, really good at managing and controlling how stars look to the public. It's like magic makeup for their image." What's extra special and strong about Van Dyke's point of view is that he himself stayed a truly honest, kind, and good person all through his long career. He never played mean tricks or hurt people to get ahead. So he could easily spot when the difference between a star's happy public image and their real actions wasn't just normal fun Hollywood advertising or showbiz style, but something much darker and worse. A fake cover hiding truly bad, destructive, and harmful behavior that hurt real people. In the next few minutes, we'll take a close look at six legendary famous actors that Van Dyke reportedly pointed out as especially troubling and bad. These weren't just normal hard-to-work-with types, grumpy artists, or stars who were a little demanding sometimes. No, these were men whose actions went way over the line, crossing into really shocking stuff that even other people in Hollywood who saw a lot of bad behavior felt surprised and upset by. These weren't simply celebrities having small temper tantrums or bad days. They were performers whose mean actions left real, lasting damage and pain on the unlucky people who had to work near them or be around them. But first, before we get to the list, we really need to understand something important. How could one of America's biggest, most successful comedians make audiences all over the whole world laugh so hard and feel so happy, while at the same time creating a scary atmosphere full of fear, humiliation, and tears for the people who worked behind the scenes with him every day? And why did Dick Van Dyke find this two-faced Jekyll and Hyde kind of personality so especially disturbing and hard to accept? It's better, but you still have to get the Black & Decker to open you up. Oh yeah, and one Jerry Lewis, the dark side of a comedy legend. When Jerry Lewis bounced and jumped around wildly on movie screens back in the 1950s and 1960s, audiences got to see a comedian with amazing physical skills, super stretchy face expressions, and a childlike wild excitement that felt pure and free. His rubbery funny faces, crazy fast movements, and manic high energy created a comic character that seemed like the perfect picture of total uninhibited joy and silliness. No holding back at all. This super carefully made image turned him into a true huge cultural star whose happy fun appealed to people in every country, crossing all kinds of borders. But behind this bright, joyful, happy mask, there was a man who became known for being extraordinarily cruel and mean, especially to people who had way less power than him, like workers, helpers, or people lower on the set. A film historian who knows a lot about old comedies explained that Lewis created a comic character who looked like he was the total opposite of careful planning. Everything seemed wild, spontaneous, and just for laughs. But the real truth behind the scenes couldn't have been more different and opposite. Every single little gesture, move, and joke was planned out super carefully and exactly, And Lewis demanded the exact same super-obsessive perfect control and precision from absolutely everyone working around him. No mistakes allowed. According to many people who actually worked with him on sets and in studios, Lewis kept everyone under his control mostly through mean humiliation, yelling horrible verbal abuse, and sudden explosive fits of that scared people. Crew members on the set, and especially women who worked there, often got the worst and hardest of his super strict perfectionism. He would publicly yell and berate them right in front of everybody for even tiny little things he thought were failures or not perfect enough. Dick Van Dyke ran into Jerry Lewis several times during his own long career, and he was reportedly really stunned and shocked by how huge the disconnect was between Lewis's super funny public side and his mean private side, according to an entertainment historian who knows the stories. Van Dyke once reportedly said something like this to a close colleague: "Jerry hated being questioned, that made him dangerous." Those words really captured something very important and true about Lewis. He just couldn't stand or tolerate anyone at all challenging or even asking about his total absolute authority and control over everything. This zero tolerance for any questions or pushback went way beyond just creative movie decisions. It spread to how he treated anyone he saw as beneath him or less important. Lots of different accounts and stories describe how Lewis would go out of his way to deliberately humiliate and embarrass extras walking in the background, technicians fixing lights and cameras, and even smaller supporting actors who had less famous roles. Sometimes it happened because of actual small mistakes, but often it seemed like he did it just for his own personal amusement or simply to show everyone who was really the big boss and in total charge. A cultural analyst who looks at old stars said Lewis had a special bad reputation, especially for how he treated women on set. Many female performers and workers described a repeating pattern of belittling mean comments that cut people down, unwanted flirty advances that he tried to pass off as just jokes, and an overall atmosphere where women felt like they were either just sexual objects for him or easy targets for his public humiliation games. For someone like Dick Van Dyke, who always made a point to treat women with real respect, kindness, and politeness his whole life, this particular part of Lewis's bad behavior would have felt especially disturbing, wrong, and hard to stomach. What makes the whole Jerry Lewis story extra complicated and tricky is that he also did a lot of genuine good charity work. He worked hard for years with the Muscular Dystrophy Association, raising tons of money and awareness to help kids with the disease, often crying emotional tears on TV during big telethons. This creates a really confusing moral mix. The super cruel taskmaster boss who terrorized people behind the scenes versus the tearful, caring advocate who fought for sick children in front of the cameras. That kind of double life and contradiction reportedly made Van Dyke feel deeply troubled and conflicted inside. One historian summed it up like this: "He made the whole world laugh and feel happy while secretly breaking people's spirits and hurting them badly behind the camera." What really separated Lewis from just being a tough, strict director or boss was how so much of his cruelty seemed totally gratuitous and unnecessary. Like the point was to humiliate and hurt people, not just a side effect of chasing super high-quality work and excellence. Say goodnight to the gentleman now. Good night to the gentlemen, that's right, now to these gentlemen, too, Errol Flynn, suave menace in a tuxedo. When Errol Flynn did his exciting swashbuckling sword fights and adventures across big theater screens in classic movies like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, he perfectly showed a special kind of dashing, brave heroism that grabbed and held audiences all around the world. With his strong athletic body moves, graceful jumps, and that roguish naughty boy charm and wink, Flynn quickly became Hollywood's #1 top action hero during the 1930s and right into the early 1940s. But behind that shiny, heroic, perfect image on screen, there was a man whose real everyday behavior in life was truly disturbing and scary, even when you compare it to Hollywood's already pretty loose and forgiving standards back then. A film historian explained that Flynn's movie character felt so exciting and intoxicating to watch because it kept all the danger and wildness inside safe, acceptable story boundaries. His roles broke laws and rules, but always ended up doing it for some higher good moral reason or justice. The really horrible scary thing about Flynn's actual real life was that it completely flipped and reversed that whole formula. Underneath his smooth, sophisticated, charming outside look, there was a genuine deep darkness that had no moral rules or boundaries to hold it back at all. This darkness showed up in the most disturbing ways, especially in how Flynn treated women throughout his life and career. Over the years, he faced multiple serious allegations and claims of sexual assault from different women, including two very high-profile big court trials in 1943, where he was accused of statutory rape involving underage girls. Even though juries found him not guilty in both cases, which started the famous old saying in like Flynn that people still joke about today, the pattern of him acting like a predator kept going, with lots of women later describing scary encounters that went from unwanted harassment all the way to outright physical violence and force. An entertainment historian who knows private Hollywood stories said that Dick Van Dyke reportedly once called Flynn poison in a tux during a quiet private conversation with someone he trusted. That nickname fit him perfectly and was really sharp. Flynn's super charming, handsome outside look didn't make him safer. It actually made him more dangerous because people trusted him right away. His clean public hero persona gave him the best possible cover to hide behavior that would have shocked and horrified all his loving fans if they knew the truth. On top of how he treated women, Flynn reportedly had secret sympathies and positive feelings toward Nazis and their ideas, even though he played heroic soldiers fighting hard against Nazi Germany in action movies like Desperate Journey. The FBI actually investigated him back then because they suspected he might have real ties or connections to fascist groups. And some of his private letters and notes that came out later showed views on race, politics, and other things that completely went against the brave freedom-fighting heroes he loved playing on screen. A cultural analyst said what made Flynn especially disturbing and upsetting to other actors and friends like Van Dyke was how totally and completely his public shining image and his private dark life contradicted each other in every way. Basically, Flynn turned his own natural charm and strong heroic movie image into a weapon that let him get away with predatory bad conduct. Lots of people in Hollywood knew rumors and stories about it, but very few ever challenged him openly or tried to stop it because his movies made so much money at the box office, and he was such a big star. Flynn's own self-destructive bad habits, like his legendary huge drinking of alcohol and heavy drug use over many years, finally caught up to him and ruined his health. He died way too young at just 50 years old in 1959, and by then the one-stashing handsome hero of the big screen had mostly turned into a tired, worn-out, dissipated shadow of his former self. But the real lasting damage he did to other people, especially the women he hurt, remained the most disturbing and sad part of his whole legacy. One historian put it this way: Hollywood ignored all the bad rumors and stories about him until it was way too late to fix anything. The old studio system didn't create Flynn's bad predatory nature inside him, but it definitely protected him, covered for him, and enabled him to keep going as long as his movies stayed popular and made big money for the studios. With Me on the Radio and I Never Heard Him Sing So Beautifully, he had a quality and his range seemed to have improved. 3. Bing Crosby, the Cruel Crooner. For millions and millions of Americans over the years, just hearing Bing Crosby's smooth, warm voice instantly meant Christmas time was here. His gentle, soft, comforting version of White Christmas always brought up cozy pictures in people's minds of warm family get-togethers by the fireplace, happy holiday cheer, snow falling outside, and all the best nostalgic feelings of home and togetherness. On movie screens, his relaxed, easygoing style, kind avuncular uncle-like manner, wise and calm attitude made him seem like the absolute ideal perfect father figure. The kind of man whose natural kindness, gentle humor, and easy natural charm perfectly showed what everyone wanted American family home life to look and feel like. But this super carefully built and polished public image stands in huge stark contrast to the painful private reality that came out later from Crosby's own sons after he passed away. They described a father at home who used physical beatings, emotional cruelty and coldness, and an impossible strict perfectionism that left deep emotional scars and hurts on his children that lasted their whole lives. An entertainment historian who follows these old stories said Van Dyke was reportedly horrified and sickened when he first learned the real truth about what went on inside the Crosby family behind closed doors. Just like millions of other regular Americans, Van Dyke had completely believed and bought into the warm, happy image of Bing as the perfect, good-natured dad everyone wished they had. The shocking reality that he was a father who regularly beat his sons hard with leather straps and heavy metal-studded belts while demanding super rigid, impossible-to-meet high standards, hit him really hard and deeply. Oh, then, their honest family memoir book called Going My Own Way, Gary Crosby, who was Bing's oldest son, along with his brothers, shared heartbreaking details about growing up in a childhood that was mostly ruled by constant fear, anxiety, and a desperate daily need to try and please a cold father who seemed completely unable or unwilling to show any real warm, genuine affection or love. Gary even described in detail how Bing had a special trophy room set up in their big house, a private place where he would drag his sons to give them painful beatings for whatever he saw as bad behavior or rule breaking, then force them to walk back out looking completely calm, dry-eyed, and composed with no tears showing at all, like nothing had happened. A cultural analyst explained that this massive disconnect between Crosby's always warm public singing voice and his icy cold private home behavior really disturbed and bothered Van Dyke more than almost anything else. Here was a man whose beautiful tender voice could make millions feel loved and safe while singing touching songs like I'll Be Home for Christmas. Yet at the very same time, he was creating a home environment for his own kids that they later described as totally empty of real emotional warmth and full of physical threats and pain. The level of hypocrisy felt absolutely staggering and hard to believe. This same kind of two-faced hypocrisy even showed up in how people saw Crosby at work in show business. He always built an image of being the most easygoing, low-maintenance, no-problems performer anyone could ever hope to work with. Just show up, sing perfectly, and go home relaxed. But the people who actually worked closely with him on sets, recordings, and shows described a very different man. Someone who secretly kept super exacting high standards in his head and could turn merciless and unforgiving toward any colleagues, singers, musicians, or crew who failed to hit those perfect marks, though he usually showed his anger through cold, icy silent dismissal and cutting looks rather than Jerry Lewis-style loud explosive yelling. The historian explained it clearly. Crosby's kind of evil wasn't loud, flashy, or showy at all. It was cold, carefully calculated, quiet, and always hidden neatly behind his perfect, polite public manners and smile. He had the amazing ability to charm and win over millions of people listening on the radio or watching on screen, all while secretly putting his own children through serious abuse that gave them lifelong psychological pain and damage they had to carry forever. For a person like Dick Van Dyke, who truly valued real family love above almost everything and always treated his own children with steady warmth, fun, support, and kindness, this kind of secret betrayal of fatherhood probably felt like the most disturbing and heartbreaking one of all. The huge contrast between Crosby's sweet public nice guy image and his harsh private reality finally became impossible for people to ignore after Gary Crosby bravely published his tell-all memoir book in 1983, 7 full years after Bing had already died. While a few other family members argued against some specific details in the book, The overall clear picture of Bing as a very harsh, physically abusive father who used belts and fear was backed up and confirmed by many different sources, including stories from several of Bing's other children over time. One analyst summed up the sad irony. He sang the beautiful song White Christmas that makes everyone feel warm and happy, while at home he was beating his own kids. Evil can sometimes sound really beautiful and touching. That's exactly what made Crosby's whole case so especially disturbing and hard to accept for people who knew the truth. His smooth voice stood for everything good and decent about America: warmth, family, holiday joy. But his real actions at home were the complete exact opposite in every way. Van Dyke, who managed to reach similar huge levels of success and fame in entertainment without ever giving up his own real humanity and kindness, reportedly found this particular double life and hypocrisy almost impossible to wrap his head around or forgive. Ribs and sauerkraut, and he never knew what hit it. 4. Wallace Beery, the brutal gentle giant. Back in the 1930s and right into the early 1940s, Wallace Beery's gruff, rough-sounding, but secretly tender movie character made him one of MGM Studios' most reliable and steady box office stars who always brought in crowds and money. He specialized in playing big, tough-looking guys on the outside who had soft hearts of gold deep down. His most famous and loved roles came in touching movies like The Champ, where he played a broken-down boxer dad, and Min and Bill, a heartfelt dockside story. And both of those got him serious Academy Award attention and nominations because they showed his range so well. Beery built a strong on-screen image of being a lovable big brute, someone who's rough voice, tough face, and big body hit a fundamental basic decency and goodness that always came through in the end. But behind the scenes in real Hollywood life, Beery was reportedly one of the most genuinely feared and scary figures walking around the lots. He was known as a man with a quick, explosive temper that could go off anytime, strong racist attitudes that were harsh even for his time, and real physical brutality that made him truly dangerous to anyone unlucky enough to have to work with him or cross his path on a bad day. An entertainment historian shared that Van Dyke allegedly once described Beery as someone who didn't even need to act when he played a mean thug or bad guy in movies. It came naturally. That was a really cutting, sharp observation about a man whose movie persona as a tough guy with secret hidden goodness completely flipped and inverted who he actually was in real life. A person who put on a professional, polite face in public that barely covered up genuine cruelty, violence, and ugliness inside. The most disturbing and talked about allegations about Wallace Beery center around a long-lasting old Hollywood rumor that he played a big part in causing the death of popular comedian Ted Healy, the guy who originally created the Three Stooges comedy team. According to many different accounts from people who were around back then, Beery was part of a rough group that severely beat up Ted Healy outside the famous Trocadero nightclub one night in 1937. The beating was so bad that it caused serious injuries, and Healy died just a few days later from what happened. While the story was never proven in court or made official, a lot of longtime Hollywood insiders have always believed and said that MGM's powerful fixers and lawyers worked hard behind the scenes to cover up Beery's involvement completely, because if it came out fully, it would have ended his big career in one huge scandal. Whether the Healy incident happened exactly as the rumors say or not, it still perfectly matches and reflects what so many people who worked with Beery over the years reported. His violence wasn't just mean words, yelling, or professional arguments. It was real physical hitting and truly dangerous to be around. A film historian explained that multiple old accounts describe him actually hitting crew members with his fists, physically intimidating and scaring his co-stars on set to make them do what he wanted, and using his huge imposing size. He weighed around 250 pounds and stood over 6 feet tall to threaten and bully anyone who dared cross him or disagree. This scary physical intimidation and bullying was often paired with really virulent open racism that went far beyond the casual everyday prejudice that was sadly common in his era. Beery was well known for flat-out refusing to work with any black performers or crew members at all, and he would loudly use ugly racial slurs and epithets right out in the open on set without caring who heard. This created a really hostile, awful working environment that the big studios usually just went along with and tolerated rather than stepping in to stop or fix it, because Beery was too valuable to them. A culture analyst who studies these things said what made Beery particularly unsettling and creepy to his contemporaries like Van Dyke was the cold calculation and thinking that seemed to be behind a lot of his bad behavior. His cruelty wasn't always just hot, quick-temper outbursts that he couldn't control. It often looked like it came from a considered, planned worldview where he truly believed some groups of people were simply beneath basic human respect or consideration. He wasn't just occasionally difficult or having a bad day. He was consistently abusive in ways that suggested he really viewed certain kinds of people as less than human. Unlike some other difficult or mean performers whose amazing artistic brilliance and talent at least partly explained or made up for why people put up with them, Beery was mostly seen as a limited actor. He had good solid instincts for playing certain rough roles, but he didn't have exceptional world-class talent that made him irreplaceable. His continued big employment, high salary, and starring roles at powerful MGM came mostly from his reliable ability to draw regular audiences who loved his gruff characters, plus the personal liking that studio head Louis B. Mayer had for Beery's macho tough guy persona in real life. One historian put it bluntly: he played lovable brutes and rough guys with hearts of gold on screen, but the real brute was right there behind his own eyes the whole time. What really disturbed and upset Van Dyke and others who knew him was that Beery's on-screen stories, where rough tough guys find redemption and show their hidden good side, had absolutely no real-life parallel or match at all. The gruff, scary exterior didn't actually hide a heart of gold like in the movies. Instead, it barely covered up a huge S. Carry capacity for shocking cruelty that sometimes exploded all the way into outright real physical violence against people. The fact that this same man got so famous and loved for playing roles that always emphasized the basic humanity and goodness hiding under a rough surface makes it one of Hollywood's most cynical and fake disconnects between the pretty image they sold and the ugly reality underneath. Tough, what do you do in Los Angeles, Mr. McCree? 5. Spencer Tracy, brilliant actor, brutal drunk. Very few actors in all of Hollywood's long history have ever been more universally respected, admired, and praised for their pure amazing craft and talent than Spencer Tracy. His supernatural, realistic acting style felt so real and effortless that he gave young actors his famous simple advice: the big secret is just know your lines and don't bump into the furniture. That down-to-earth approach earned him an incredible 9 Academy Award nominations over his career, plus 2 wins back-to-back, which is super rare and shows how much everyone loved his work. On screen in his movies, Tracy so often played characters who carried real moral authority, basic decency, quiet strength, and thoughtful, smart masculinity that made him seem like the ideal good man. But off-screen in his personal life, Tracy's well-known serious struggle with alcoholism showed a completely different side. A man who could suddenly turn capable of shocking real violence, especially directed toward women. This dark, scary side was something that his longtime romantic partner Katharine Hepburn, along with the powerful studio system bosses, worked very hard and carefully to keep completely hidden from the public and fans for years. An entertainment historian said Van Dyke reportedly saw Tracy's destructive, angry side up close for himself at some big industry events and parties over the years. When Tracy was sober, he could be charming, really intelligent, funny, and super engaging to talk to. Everyone loved being around him then. But once he started drinking, his whole personality would flip in a frightening way and change completely. The calm, moral authority figure he played so perfectly in serious films like Judgment at Nuremberg could suddenly become physically threatening, aggressive, and verbally vicious and cruel after just a few drinks. Stories from people who knew him say Tracy's alcohol-fueled violence and anger didn't just target one kind of person, it hit different people in his circle. But women ended up in particular danger from him. Multiple different accounts over time describe him slapping women hard across the face, roughly shoving them away, or grabbing them forcefully during his bad drunken episodes. This included his partner Katharine Hepburn herself in some cases. Back then, people usually made excuses for it all and called it just the sad, unfortunate side effect of his disease of alcoholism, rather than facing it head-on as the real abuse and harm it actually was. A cultural analyst explained what troubled Van Dyke and a lot of other fair-minded people about Tracy's situation the most. How completely and thoroughly his genuine huge artistic brilliance and talent were used as an excuse to downplay, ignore, or forgive his frightening violent behavior toward others. There seemed to be this quiet, unwritten agreement among powerful Hollywood insiders that Tracy's incredible contributions to great cinema and acting were so valuable and important that any women he hurt along the way were basically seen as acceptable sad collateral damage, not something worth risking his career over. This kind of cold moral math and calculation really disturbed people like Van Dyke, who strongly believed that basic, everyday human decency and kindness should never be sacrificed or thrown away, not even when someone has extraordinary once-in-a-generation talent. The contrast between Tracy's warm, decent on-screen characters and his scary private drunk behavior felt especially sharp and painful in some of his biggest classic films, where he played strong men standing firmly against violence, injustice, or brutality. In powerful movies like Bad Day at Black Rock, where he confronts racism and murder, or Inherit the Wind fighting for truth against closed minds, Tracy beautifully embodied real moral courage, standing up for what's right and principled strong resistance to cruelty, values that his own drunken violent actions in real life regularly broke and contradicted completely. Tracy's story gets complicated because he clearly suffered from real serious alcoholism during a time when doctors and society didn't understand the disease very well at all, and there weren't good treatments or help like today. The historian explained that part honestly. But what made his whole situation particularly troubling and hard for contemporaries like Van Dyke to accept wasn't just that he had a bad drinking problem. It was how the entire big haul. Why would power structure, including studios, friends, and even some family, work together like a team to shield and protect him from ever facing any real consequences or accountability for the violence and harm that came along with his drinking? This same heavy protection even covered up parts of Tracy's complicated, messy personal life. Even though he stayed legally married to his wife Louise for a full 43 years until he died, his long-term romantic relationship with Katharine Hepburn was an open secret that everyone in Hollywood knew about, while it was carefully hidden and never talked about in public to protect his clean family man image. This whole arrangement was basically a fake story that the studios approved and helped keep going so Tracy's perfect public reputation stayed safe. And it fit right into the bigger pattern of constant image management and hiding bad things that ran through his whole career. One analyst summed it up with a sad line. He could charm and win over a camera with his acting 1 minute, and then turn around and slap it across the room in anger the next. Tracy's brilliant acting work so often explored the deep, complicated struggles of flawed, imperfect men who were still trying hard to do the right thing despite their problems, which makes the way the industry protected and excused his own real flaws and harms feel particularly ironic and wrong. Van Dyke, who built his own huge successful career without ever leaving a trail of hurt women or damaged people behind him, reportedly saw the whole industry's long protection of Tracy as a clear sign of a broken system that too often put great art and talent way above basic human kindness and decency, a moral compromise and shortcut that he personally refused to ever take in his own life and choices. Here, always remember, go for the red first because if you don't, your opponent will. 6. Kirk Douglas, darkest star of Hollywood's golden age. For millions of movie fans all over the world, Kirk Douglas stood out as the perfect example of strong, intense masculine energy mixed with real moral complexity and depth on the big screen. Through his powerful performances in true classic films like Spartacus, where he played a slave leader fighting for freedom, Paths of Glory, a strong anti-war story, and Champion as a tough boxer, Douglas created his own special screen persona, super physically dynamic and strong, intellectually smart and engaged, and always morally nuanced with hard inner questions about right and wrong. On top of his acting, his real-life support for blacklisted writers during the scary McCarthy years, and his brave choice to take on controversial tough subjects in movies earned him a solid reputation for having real personal courage that went way beyond just the fictional heroes he played. But behind this mostly admirable and positive public image, Douglas allegedly left behind a long trail of real pain, fear, and trauma, especially among young actresses coming up in the business who described him as a predator who used his huge star power and position to sexually assault women without ever facing real punishment or consequences. An entertainment historian who knows inside stories said Van Dyke was reportedly very clear and direct in his private opinions about Douglas, no sugarcoating. When someone once asked him directly about Douglas's reputation with women, Van Dyke allegedly answered something like, "You wouldn't want your daughter alone with him." That was a really strong, devastating, and serious judgment coming from someone like Van Dyke, who was famous for always measuring his words very carefully and being polite even when talking about other performers. The strongest and most repeated allegations about Kirk Douglas focus on a disturbing incident involving a very young 16-year-old Natalie Wood back in the 1950s. According to multiple trusted Hollywood sources who were around at the time, Wood was sexually assaulted by a much older major movie star while she was at an audition or meeting in a room at the famous Chateau Marmont Hotel. During Wood's lifetime, the man was never publicly named or accused openly. But after she passed away, a large number of industry insiders and people close to the events have since identified Douglas as the star involved in that awful story. The Natalie Wood allegation feels especially disturbing and heartbreaking because it fits right into a much bigger, repeating pattern of behavior that several different women who worked with or near Douglas described over the years. A cultural analyst explained that these weren't just one or two isolated bad moments. They seem to reflect what a lot of people in old Hollywood quietly understood as his standard usual approach to young actresses, using his big star power, fame, and physical size to intimidate and coerce them into sexual situations, all while feeling completely safe because he knew the powerful studio system would always protect him and make any problems disappear. And that protection really was huge and effective back then. Douglas's massive star power, box office success, and money-making ability for studios meant that any complaints or stories about his bad behavior were usually quietly handled with cash payoffs to keep people silent, better job offers or roles given to victims who agreed to stay quiet, or straight-up intimidation and threats for anyone who even thought about speaking out publicly. How well this whole system worked is proven by the fact that most of the serious allegations and stories about Douglas only started coming out openly after he finally died at the very old age of 103 in 2020, when it was finally safe for people to talk without fear of ruining their careers. The historian said what reportedly disturbed Van Dyke the most about Douglas wasn't just the bad actions themselves. Sadly, that kind of thing wasn't totally unique in old Hollywood. It was the absolutely enormous disconnect and contradiction between Douglas's loud public advocacy and stands for moral good causes, like fighting the blacklist and pushing for artistic freedom, and the way he allegedly treated vulnerable young women with far less power behind closed doors. Here was a man who took brave public stands against unfair blacklisting in Hollywood and spoke up for real artistic freedom and rights, while at the same time reportedly using his own power in the most exploitative, abusive, and predatory ways possible in private. That contradiction even showed up in many of his most famous movie roles, too. In a lot of his biggest hits, Douglas played strong characters who fought hard against corrupt, powerful systems, stood up bravely for the weak and vulnerable, and resisted exploitation and injustice, themes that stood in total, stark opposite contrast to how he allegedly treated young actresses who had way less power and protection than he did. One analyst concluded sadly, his legacy on the silver screen is all about greatness and powerful performances, but in the whispers of old Hollywood, it's tied to real fear and pain. What makes Douglas's case feel particularly big and important is how long and thoroughly his alleged bad behavior was protected. Not just during the old strict studio era when things were hidden easily, but well into more modern times when people thought things had improved. Van Dyke, who carefully built his own long career on genuine real decency and kindness, both in front of the camera and behind it in real life, reportedly saw this decades-long protection of predatory actions as a clear example of an industry that was far too willing to separate and excuse great artistic talent from basic, everyday human decency and respect for others. These six men, Jerry Lewis, Errol Flynn, Bing Crosby, Wallace Beery, Spencer Tracy, and Kirk Douglas, don't just stand as single separate stories of bad behavior. Together, they show a bigger, repeating systemic pattern in old Hollywood where a star's huge artistic talent, fame, and ability to make lots of money for studios were almost always seen as way more important than all the real human pain, hurt, and damage they left behind on others. From Lewis's cruel perfectionism and humiliation games to Douglas's alleged long pattern of predation and power abuse, each case shows exactly how powerful and effective Hollywood's big image-making machine could be at completely hiding and covering up the most disturbing realities from the public and fans who loved these stars. What makes Dick Van Dyke's own perspective on all this particularly valuable and worth listening to is that he proved with his own long, successful career that you could reach the very top of Hollywood without ever needing to be cruel, mean, or hurtful to get there. A cultural historian noted that his steady, consistent kindness, professionalism, and real decency toward everyone stand as a quiet but strong rebuke and argument against the old idea that great artistic brilliance somehow requires cruelty or automatically excuses bad harmful behavior toward other people. The big uncomfortable contrasts between these men's carefully built perfect public images and their often ugly private conduct force us to ask hard, serious questions about the movies, shows, and entertainment we all enjoy and love. The charming warm crooner whose beautiful voice still defines Christmas for so many people was reportedly beating his own children hard between recording happy holiday songs. The swashbuckling brave hero who fought for justice and freedom on screen was reportedly assaulting and hurting women between takes on set. The lovable, funny comedian who made huge audiences laugh out loud was secretly terrorizing and humiliating crew members the moment the cameras stopped rolling. The analyst said these aren't just juicy pieces of celebrity gossip to laugh at. They're actually profound, serious moral failures that the whole entertainment industry systematically enabled, protected, and allowed to keep happening for decades. What reportedly troubled and bothered Van Dyke the most wasn't only the individual bad actions themselves, which were bad enough on their own. It was the bigger collective decision by so many powerful people to always prioritize money-making entertainment value and star power over basic human dignity, respect, and safety for everyone involved. The old system didn't just fail to stop or punish abuse when it happened. It actively helped and facilitated it whenever the abuser was a big commercial success who brought in lots of ticket sales or TV ratings. Perhaps the most disturbing and scary part of all is just how long these ugly patterns managed to continue without real change. From Beery's alleged violent beating stories in the 1930s all the way to Douglas's reported predatory actions that stretched well into more modern times, Hollywood showed an amazing stubborn consistency in protecting its biggest bankable male stars no matter how badly they behaved. A sad pattern that has only really started to break and change in recent years, thanks to brave movements like Me Too that finally gave victims a stronger voice. Dick Van Dyke stands out today as a living, breathing counterexample to the old excuse that this was just how things were back in those earlier eras, or that success always required being tough and mean. The historian concluded that his amazing career proves without doubt that a person could achieve truly extraordinary levels of success, fame, and love from fans, while still treating every single person around them with steady, consistent respect, kindness, and basic human decency every day. The fact that this decent approach made Van Dyke the rare exception, instead of the normal everyday rule in Hollywood, says a lot about a much bigger moral failure that went way beyond any one single actor. It reveals an entire industry that was built so much on creating beautiful shiny illusions and images that it too often cared way more about keeping up the pretty fake picture than about protecting real fundamental humanity and kindness for the actual people who worked there. If you found this deep exploration into the hidden dark side of old Hollywood interesting and eye-opening, please hit that subscribe button for more stories that peek behind the carefully built perfect facades of entertainment history. Drop a comment below and let us know which one of these revelations surprised you the most or hit you the hardest. And share your own thoughts on how we should think about and enjoy the artistic work left behind by creators who turned out to be deeply flawed and hurtful in real life. Until next time, always remember, the most important and true performances often happen when the cameras finally stop rolling, quietly revealing a person's real character in ways that no amount of Hollywood special effects, lighting, or magic can ever fix, hide, or make look better.